Hello, everyone. I am Kate from Push, and I'm here with the amazing Cheryl Telfer. Thank you so much for joining us. So, welcome to What's Your Story on World Mental Health Day. Wow. The reason that why are we doing this? Well, I think that 2020 literally has blown our minds. And as our good friend and mental health campaigner, the incredible Jeff McDonald so eloquently puts it, COVID has democratized mental health. The last month has literally been wild, and they've had a huge impact on how we're thinking, how we're feeling, and how we're acting. But I suppose whilst that's really hard, the good thing about this is that we do suddenly start realizing the impact of external events on what's going on in our lives and what's going on in our heads. And I don't think there's ever been a better time to be talking about our mental health and the opportunity that we have to make an impact on how people understand it and look after themselves. I think at the heart of actually creating any kind of change is about people sharing stories so we can really destigmatize what is going on in the world and what's going on in our health. And also, I genuinely think that when it comes to mental health, getting to positive mental health should be the baseline of what we can all achieve and what we still want for ourselves and for others. And I think really, actually, we can get beyond that and to start thinking about how we can really get to our potential. So for this World Mental Health Day, we put together 20, my goodness, people to share their amazing stories and what they've been through. And that's what we're bringing with you today. So people talking about what they've done in order to really, really inspire you and to get you thinking a little bit differently about how your life could be as well. So with no further ado, today I am over the moon to be inviting Cheryl onto the session. And I would love to tell you a little bit about her, and then obviously over to Cheryl because I would like to find out a little bit more about what's been going on and to ask you for some of the tips that we can be sharing with other people. So hey, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here and talking about this today. But yeah, it's a good day to raise awareness.
It is. I mean, it's early on a Saturday morning, but listen, we have got a lot to learn today, so it's going to be.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of 2020, you left a career in the broadcast media and advertising industry to focus on sharing your knowledge and passion for holistic wellness and nutrition with the world. You've since launched a webinar series, which I want to learn a lot more about and talk a lot of wellness retreats and corporations. And that's exactly how we met, because Cheryl now is working with us as part of the Push team, which I'm incredibly excited about. So thank you for that. But basically to share your insights into how the holistic approach to nutrition can benefit every single one of us in becoming more connected to the food that we eat. Cheryl, what's the story behind that? Tell me a little bit about your journey and tell me a little bit about how you got there and what it is that you love doing and why you love doing it.
So yeah, if you want to tread back into to the past, I
Yeah.
guess my story and into holistic nutrition and wellness is really a personal story based on my own health struggles I've had, whether it's usually been like a physical chronic health struggle I've had
Right.
since I've been young, and I was born with a condition called sickle cell.
Right.
So
Okay.
when you have sickle cell, it's really challenging to live a regular life. But I didn't know I had sickle cell until I was in my teens. So
Yeah.
when I was younger and I wasn't kind of feeling or being able to do the same things as everyone else, I just didn't know why it was. But as I got older and I learned
Interesting.
more about my condition, I, spent a lot of time in hospital. I was still going to, study and university and all that stuff. But I was still trying to like balance living like everyone else and having this weight of my own like personal body challenges,
Yeah.
and wasn't able to keep that up. So I'll, have a lot of episodes where I'm in a hospital and very sick. And, this all in itself was very challenging for my mind,
Mm.
because I was like, why me? And it felt, a bit like a sentence. And it was, I had to work, I realized I had to work on all aspects of my health,
Yeah.
my lifestyle, to
Yeah.
even just get to a place where I could live like normally or well health,
Yeah.
even with a condition. And I think that's like I worked in the advertising industry because I'm naturally a creative person.
Yeah.
And I assumed, or I kind of like went down that path because that's what you do. You kind of like, you're creative, you either go into film or advertising if you like work with audio visual and storytelling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there's so many ways to show your creativity, and I think for me, I got to a point where I wanted to be more aligned to the things that I feel like I have real value in. And a lot of it was sharing the tips and the tools I use, the food that I use to kind of make me show up in the world and not be stuck in hospital all the time,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
spent
Yeah.
a lot of my 20s being in hospital. And you know things progress, and like I feel very well at the moment, and I realize it's a journey, and your mental health plays a huge role
Of
on
course it
the
does.
impact of your physical health.
Do you
um
know what? That's. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you there, but
no, no, go ahead.
that's so interesting. Yesterday we had an incredible gentleman called Alex Lewis on, who was our last interview yesterday, and he thought he had man flu, and it actually turned out to be strep. And within a period of 4 days, he became a quadruple amputee.
Wow.
Yeah. And he basically, we were talking yesterday. I mean, let me add to this. He now refers to himself as lucky, right?
Yeah.
Because the experience that he went through totally changed his life, of course, and and in many ways has genuinely helped him refocus. But we were talking a lot yesterday, and sorry, I'm kind of skirting around there, but the impact of physical illness, which in his case obviously was incredibly dramatic, on our mental health as well, right? And
Mm.
actually what you're talking about here, this was far beyond just the physical illness which we were going through. It was about managing your mind through that as well, because of the huge impact it was having on you on a day-to-day basis. And I think sometimes, in particular with those kind of like life managing illnesses, we don't think about that so much.
No, not at all. And I think it's what you learn, especially with your physical health as well, is that it's a process. You might feel like you've nailed it one day and you realize
Mm.
you haven't, because it'll reoccur, whether that's your mental health struggles you're having with it, or whether it's like just your physical changes or challenges that you might be having. It can reoccur. And what we want to try and do is have sort of a toolkit that we go when to kind of preempt these things, but also during these times. And I think that's what I'm learning more about, and I want to share about. And food is obviously one of those things, but
Yeah.
it's a holistic approach. You have to tackle one thing, you have to think of it as a whole. And the
Yeah.
same thing as with our bodies as well. It's like people like separate the mind
Yeah. Yeah.
from
Yeah.
the physical thing, and it's like, well, what we put into our body, what we feed ourselves, what we consume is all affecting the mind. And our mind affects how we kind of show up in the world. So
Yeah.
you have to kind of see it as a
Yeah,
whole.
that's so interesting, isn't it? And often when, people talk about, or people get very comfortable talking about physical health, and obviously less comfortable about talking about mental health, or we'll talk to an organization, and they'll be like, yeah, we're going to make mental health priority. It's like, it's not just mental health, right? It's the
Mm,
whole thing. Everything completely influences everything else. And I
yeah.
think, and I love the way that you're talking about it, because I don't everything that you do, and how you express the work that you're doing really helps communicate that to people. And I don't know if it's always that obvious, and it's brilliant to have it reinforced in
Mm,
such a clear way, and because of the experiences that you've had. And that's where I think your story becomes incredibly powerful. When you go out and talk to people, do you talk about that, or do you find that you're naturally working more with people in similar situations?
I'm not always working with people in similar situations, but I have started using that as
Yeah.
a way to show people that you don't need to hit rock bottom. You don't need to have a chronic condition to
Yeah.
kind of start working on yourself. Like,
Yeah.
and I used to kind of shy away from talking about my health challenges because,
Yeah.
you just assume that people think you're incapable of doing anything, or kind of, or being labeled or identified as, the person with this.
Yes.
And but I've embraced it, because actually I personally don't call myself a sick person. I just say I experience these things. It's not who I am. It's just an experience I go through.
Yeah.
Like with, anything, you just go through the motions. At the end of it, you are who you are, a whole person, and there's things that are outside of you that are, just experiences. So
Yeah.
yeah, I use that as kind of like a way for people to understand that, yeah, you can have some of the worst conditions, worst diagnosis upon you, but you can still, don't have to kind of just give up. You can
Yeah.
totally still work on yourself. You can maintain things as, you move along life, but you don't have to wait for a crisis to come before you start looking after yourself.
And do you know what? And this is really interesting, isn't it? And I'm really, let's go back to that guy, Alex. For him, and what I should also add is that beforehand, he refers to, he was pretty much a functioning alcoholic, right? And it
Mm.
was actually in this happening to him, then he, that was a crisis point, which then radically changed his life and made him start living in a different way. But what you've highlighted there, we don't have to get to that place. And I almost wonder, if there's something with what's happened with the pandemic, is that for me, so for me, what I went through, so I was signed off with stress from work, which at the time was incredibly challenging. But that for me was my moment of then creating change. And I wonder
Mm.
if in some ways that actually COVID could or should be that for some people, to actually say, well, what do I want life to look like now? What
Yeah.
do I want life to look like now? How do I want to be living? How do I want to look after myself? Because I fear, and I don't know if you see this a lot with the work that you do, we're such terrors for just kind of like of just existing. Do you know, like just
Mm.
going through life on this, like, and I think that's what we were like a bit like before pre-COVID, like doing so much, like constantly slightly on the back foot, life full of overwhelm and just never being able to do enough. But we were just so used to it, and we were just kind of existing. Do you know what I mean? And actually, this
Yeah.
should have been just a moment of just like, you know, well, what do I want life to be like now?
Yeah, I think for everyone, people have been affected very differently by this pandemic.
Yeah.
It's not
Yes.
been the same. And some people, whether they haven't been financially impacted, it doesn't matter. They might have been, their mental health might have been impacted from like seeing people less, that everyone's pain
Yeah.
is valid,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
even if some people might end up, worse off.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely a collective moment for the world to kind of
Yeah.
be like, what
Yeah.
is working out and what isn't? What do we need to like fix with our own sort of collective mindset about how we run our lives in this world. I think for me, as a holistic health coach in training, I look into like cultures of longevity. So I look into the places around the world
Yeah.
where they've managed to kind of, you know, not go at such a fast pace of life, and like
Yeah.
just take it in their stride and still live a fulfilling life. I think, I'm from London and I live in the West, I guess, and there's this sort of real push to growth and to scale and to
Yeah.
get so much money coming in,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's the cost of all
Oh my
this
God.
pressure we're putting on ourselves?
So true. And the
And
person we don't look after is ourselves. Our self-care goes to the bottom of the pile.
yeah, and it's not, it's not inherently bad to want nice things for ourselves or to kind of push to exceed in our careers and things, but there's a way to do it that we can find a bit of equilibrium. There's a moment for like pushing it, and there's a moment for like kind of like
Yeah.
chilling out a bit and just recouping. But there, in my 20s, it was like go, 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 even though my body was like, no, 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 stop, stop,
Yeah,
calm
yeah,
down.
yeah. And you're getting signals, right? We get
Yeah,
signals from our body all the time, but we choose.
all the time,
And I think the focus genuinely is on the wrong bloody things.
100%.
I think that, if I think back to my career in media, I mean, Jesus Christ, no wonder I ended up being signed off. This
Mm.
insane lifestyle that I was living, making my quinoa salad on a Sunday full of hope and promise,
Yeah.
and then on the Monday heading to the gym, Tuesday's getting more and more busy and more stressed, and come Thursday and Friday, I'm lying head first in a pool of gin somewhere,
Yeah.
and it was that constant up and down, and just like utter, like I was not kind to me,
No.
and I put everything else first. Like, and I've only got this one body and one mind, and I just broke it. I fucking broke it. Like, there's no
Yeah.
two ways about it. And why do we? I don't know. Like, and the focus is on the wrong bit, and then we feel guilty when we do stuff for ourselves. Like that whole thing, like loving ourselves. Like people think it's a bad thing. It should be the first thing we do.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's a language thing, and people aren't getting like there's a vernacular sort of disconnect there where loving yourself or like self-care is just seen as very selfish. But
Yeah,
self-care doesn't have to be bubbles and face masks all the time. It is a part of self-care, it's your skincare self-care, but self-care is ultimately listening to your needs because your body, your mind is showing you what is out of balance all the time. It's
yeah, yeah,
always
yeah,
giving you
yeah,
signals, whether it's like you're not being able to sleep properly, whether you're having like food cravings for certain things, whether your weight is fluctuating, your skin is, breaking out. There's always signs. Your stomach, a lot of people's anxiety shows up in their gut
Oh,
health.
so
Um,
true.
so it's like it's telling you stuff, but when you're focused on, external things that are stimulations or kind of pushing for our goals and stuff like that, you can sort of remove yourself from yourself and
Yeah.
you kind of lose track of where
And I,
you're at.
and I think because we're so rarely tapped in to us or making the time for us, that we end up being like buffered around by the world and all these external things and not quite being sure why we don't feel good about it.
Mm,
But we've spent no time thinking about what does or doesn't make us feel good in the first place. And I actually I wanted to pick up on something that you said earlier. And I'm really impressed by it. The fact that you were talking about the creativity, and actually, whereas previously, obviously, it was very much within the space of advertising, but you've realised that that's such a core value to you, but you're still doing it, but in a totally different field.
mm.
And I wonder, for me, like I know that love and humor and ambition, those are my core values, and again, I was in that industry before but brought it over, and I think it's such an important thing that we get really clear on who we are and what we stand for, and it can work in different sectors, but we've got to do that piece of work
100%.
first.
100%. And I think that's again is like it could be down to the schooling and
Yeah,
education and being told that this, career or degree gives you this kind of career or this, take this route and you get that. And now you're seeing, even for example, medical doctors who have, studied for years and gone into medicine
yeah,
or some sort of medical practice, and now they've, pivoted into other areas that are more aligned with them, but still using their passion for, healing, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
they might have taken more of a functional approach or holistic approach, and you're seeing more and more doctors who are kind of more awake to that.
yeah,
Whereas previously, there's a set standard in the industry or set standard in it's like, oh, you want to help someone, be a nurse, be a doctor, or whatever.
yeah,
But there's so many ways to do that, and there's so many ways we have been doing that for years. And I think again in the West, especially in the UK and in America, we sometimes are so disconnected from like our heritage and our ancestors and how they managed life. It's not like they didn't have their own stress. They may not have like financial stresses. Well, they have financial stresses, but may not have like,
in a
debt
very
piling
different
up.
way, right? In a very
It's a
different way.
very different way, but they
Yeah.
still have to manage it. And maybe they managed it through like community talk therapy, storytelling, and all these things. And there's a reason why it works. So we need to think about how have people managed their minds previously, and not just like, kind of having a one-way approach to things.
Do you know what? It's really interesting. I can remember doing this talk some time ago, and it was to some pretty, very, very, very senior professionals, very, very, very well educated professionals. And I was talking about the impact now, and this was some time ago, certainly pre-COVID, and the impact, the stress levels that we're all feeling, right? And one of them was like, "Well, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Back in the 1900s when people were going up chimneys and down mines, we have nothing to compare to that. The millennials these days are just on their phones." And I suppose, and the point is that it's all perspective, right? The
It's all
point,
perspective.
it's all perspective, and actually those people didn't have to deal with XYZ alongside, and didn't have anywhere near the social pressures that
Yeah.
a teenager growing up now does.
There's a whole new level of stress. I think to myself, if I was in school with social media, like, I was in school when mobile phones just came out, but if I was in school with social media, I don't think I'm equipped to
No,
handle that.
no, no. I mean, I get that, and I genuinely, we see now, in particular, with like really young 20s, that we've for so long we've always kind of like been identified by our jobs, but people now, but young 20-year-olds now, actually wanting something totally different because
Mm,
they've had such entirely different experiences. And what is it that they stand for now? What is it that what is their identity going to be made up of instead?
yeah. I think a lot of them are like, well, I can't speak for them and I'm not really young, but I would say that a lot of them are exposed to more information
Yeah,
about different cultures, different people, and they're probably got more of an advocacy element to their way they show up in the world. I think they're more conscious about
yeah,
certain things that are going on, whether it's a planet, whether it's sustainability, whether it is mental health. I think
yeah,
their information is there, and that's the plus side to social media and things like YouTube, where you have like a plethora of information that you can access and stories you can access. But the downside is that we're overexposed and there's
yeah,
no
yeah,
balance
yeah,
there.
yeah,
And
yeah,
one of the things in my personal toolkit is to try as much as I can to be like conscious about my time I'm spending in front of screens, and even connecting to stories outside of myself or connecting to strangers that are on the internet, and really try and just be like, I need to carve some time where, on a daily basis, if not, a whole weekend of just being off your phone,
yeah,
where you can really get back to you. And I
yeah,
obviously have the benefit of growing up in the 90s where we didn't have like screens all the time. So there was other ways to kind of connect with the world outside of yourself.
yeah.
It was more
I
play, it was more fun. And obviously as a kid, so of course there was more play, but I'm sure there was other ways that weren't so focused on our screens. And there's just a lot of information firing back at us.
It's do you know, I was looking on my Instagram yesterday, I mean, ironically, and a friend of mine is over in Greece, and he said, "This is my new series of people in beautiful places looking at their phones." And literally, he'd just taken these phones of these incredible landscapes, and there's someone sat there just on their phone, and they've got like this amazing backdrop behind them. It's like,
You're just like,
we
what?
absolutely. So, listen, you've been through a radical change in terms of your career, and and I really get this, and I'd love to know, one, I suppose, what was that tipping point of doing that? And then also, let's go on afterwards, because that's a bloody hard choice to make, and whenever I
Mm,
talk about my journey, people are like, "Oh, I wish I could do that." And it's like, believe you me, it was hard, but I chose
hard.
to do that.
Yeah.
What's stopping you? So talk to me about the tipping point, and then how you overcame some of that thinking.
I think for me, I when I worked in advertising, I started off working in production, and I kind of ended up in production because a lot of women end up in production, and they're not kind of given the reins all the time that men do when it comes to creativity in that environment.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I had to push through because I knew I was ultimately creative, and because I'd been in industry for a while, I was like, well, I'll make trailers and you know, conceptual advertisement and creative and stuff. So I kind of ended up in that, and I ultimately kind of knew in really deep down that it was something that I could practice my creativity muscle every day going
Yeah.
to it. And there's a lot of pressure. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you kind of have to like push yourself. Whereas before in production, I wasn't doing that so much. Um, but then I got to a point where there was just so much pressure. and then I was having to like produce creative ideas that were just not really tied to me. And I guess that's the artist in me, like where I was just like, if I was a painter, right, I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to paint something that I don't like looking
And it
at.
not aligning with your values, right?
Yeah. So I was like, okay, what my tipping point was is that I just in that environment it was also that I just knew that there was something more that I could do, but I just didn't feel like I was flourishing in that environment, and I didn't feel like um, I was bringing enough to the table that someone who really is passionate about like creating conceptual adverts and stuff like that would. So
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of factors there, and some of it was being in an environment where I didn't feel like I could be my whole self, um,
Yeah.
and yeah, maybe that is down to like my values as well. But I
And
was
was
just
it an
like,
obvious thing what you were gonna go to?
so when I left,
Yeah.
yeah, when I left, I was like, okay, I maybe start a skincare line. I knew I wanted to be work for myself because I knew that a big part of my own this is really hard to do, like very hard. And I was like, I knew it's going to be very hard, so I was very prepared for it. But I still was very prepared until you go into it and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I knew that ultimately I needed more flexibility in my life, and I
Yeah.
knew that even though working for yourself, being an entrepreneur is incredibly hard and sometimes you don't have much flexibility in the beginning, I knew that I needed to be able to shape my day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is it.
Yeah.
Shape my day, shape my life. So I was like, well, I have to be my own boss somehow and I need to make it work. And the only way I feel like I can really bring real value is through my creativity and through my experiences with well-being.
Yeah.
And it's just a core part of my everyday to be very awake and conscious about how I'm doing physically, just because I was forced to, because my body is like, I was sending me signals. But then also like how else, what other things have I been doing mentally and spiritually to kind of live a life where I don't feel pushed by society's expectations.
Yeah.
So I was willing to just kind of take the leap, and you know for me it wasn't really a sacrifice, because at the end of the day I was already in a place that I knew that I couldn't be forever, because
Yeah.
it'll be worse to stay in somewhere that I don't belong than to go out and just like try loads of different things out and see what sticks.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? That term, whether or not you belong, belonging is such an important part. And actually, if you're not feeling that, then you've got no need to stay there. You've got no
Yeah,
pull to stay there, no reason. And
yeah.
what, for you, what kind of was coming up? Was there any kind of like, no, don't do this? Was there any fear?
Oh yeah, totally. There was so much fear, and a lot of my fear actually was after I departed, because before I had a sort of a plan. I kind of like was obviously there's fear around finances and all those things, but there was like a plan, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna start a skincare thing, and then I'm gonna like continue learning about holistic nutrition and go into coaching. So I kind of knew that was something I knew I wanted to do,
Yeah.
but the fear, oh my gosh, it hit as soon as I left. Like that
Really?
was it.
Yeah,
And it
I
was
remember
like
that.
out into the cold, and it was really debilitating. And I would honestly say I've had a lot of challenging things going on in my life, especially my health. That was one of like, this is literally, I left on the January 30th, right? My last day at work. COVID happened like in 1st of March or whatever. That's when it started to like go crazy. So that period between like all of February, I guess, I had so much like weight of expectation that I placed on myself and others had placed on me, or I felt the pressure from other people. Um, and it sent my mental health straight down the pan, like completely was unable to cope. And it's crazy because actually when COVID did hit, and we went into lockdown, that is when things eased up for me. And I was working through my anxiety during that time, but a lot of things I learned is that I had to just let go, because trying to control it when you're
Oh,
in a really
totally.
deep state of and physical, and it's not even just like mental, it's like a physical,
You can feel
it's
it,
it's the whole feeling. It
isn't
affects
it?
your breathing, it affects everything. You've got like tingles in your body, and that was probably like, I've had anxious thoughts, I've, you know, been on a mind loop, but when it starts seeping into your body,
Yeah.
it's not nice, because you can't switch it off like that, so you've just
And
got to like not focus on
do
it.
you know what? It's really interesting. I last night, as I said, like yesterday, by the end of the day, I was literally delirious. Took myself off to bed at 9, woke up at 12, was at midnight, and was awake for 2 hours, having an anxiety and feeling like a lot going through my head. Of course, a lot of processing it, feeling it here, really feeling it. And that point that you said then about letting go, it was really interesting. Yesterday, we had a guy on called Sebastian Foucan, who's incredible. He's like the founder of free running. And he said this thing. He was like, "Do you know what? When you get to the place where you just know that life is full of obstacles, you feel differently." And I just thought that last night. I was lying there. I was like, "Look, it's okay. Life is full of obstacles," and it genuinely brought that anxiety.
Mm.
It genuinely had an effect. And so, what tools did you use to calm you?
I mean, one of the amazing tools, as I said, we went into lockdown, and actually that eased me a little bit, because I was like, oh, okay, everyone else is kind of
Yeah,
now
we're
going
all
through this.
shit for everyone.
Yeah, I felt a lot of like, it really eased my anxiety a lot, because I was like, wow, okay, collectively, now we all kind of going through it, where I felt very alone. And that's a lot of what I guess a lot of people who do feel anxiety and depression, they feel very isolated and alone. But for me, one of the amazing things I love to do, which, you know, I just never used to think I did it because of my mental health, but the more I've done it and the more I've kind of made it like a regular practice, I'm like, oh wow, this really is helping out my mind.
Yeah.
It's walking.
Yes.
Obviously, like
So with
we
you.
it's like we for me, I was obviously I walk, but I didn't go on long walks regularly. And then I started to do more long walks. Started to like just kind of aimlessly walk and not really have a goal, but just be like, okay, maybe I can go on this walk and even turn off my phone. Maybe I can go on this walk and just connect with what's around me. And I think connecting with nature, you know, there's cultures who've been doing this forever, who go forest bathing, or you
Yes.
know, just moving your body in itself helps to like shift thoughts,
I totally
because when
get
you're
it.
static, the
Totally.
energy is staying still.
Yeah.
When you're in motion, it keeps like things moving along. That's one of the things. I mean, I really like journaling as well. I don't do it all the time, but I try to get back to it. And
I think
like,
I both myself and probably about 4 of the 8 people yesterday, we all talked about journaling. The power of journaling
yeah,
is getting it
it's
out here and getting it down here so you can work on it. It's life changing.
100%. And I think, like, for many people who do feel like they can't maybe afford a therapist or go and see like a life coach or anything like that, honestly, a lot of what we are thinking is just the same thought on repeat.
Yes.
So once you put it on the page, it helps you to kind of be like, to offload, and without kind of like offloading on everyone around you. It's not saying you shouldn't, you know, have these conversations with people, but have the conversation with yourself first. Write
Yeah.
it down. Maybe you need like a prompted journal, journal prompts that might
Yeah.
help for you to
Yeah.
kind of focus the areas you're thinking of. But I've found that, like, especially during like times where I've felt a bit hopeless, I just write down exactly what I'm feeling, because sometimes we can't even put words to our thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you actually start putting words to it, it makes it more sort of like tangible, and be like, okay, why am I feeling like this? What can I do? Or why is it like irking me so much? What can I do right now? If I can't do anything, then why don't I just let it go?
Yeah. Yeah. I get
And
it.
yeah,
It's the and I think also it's the quite literal kind of getting it out of your body.
yeah,
It's like it's out of here,
the
and then
release.
yeah, it genuinely is. It genuinely is. That's awesome. So where are you now? So I love that. I love that for the kind of the overcoming thinking, the movement as you talked about as well. Actually there's you're so right. It's genuinely kind of changing. Um genuinely changing your space, changing your environment,
Hmm.
getting stuff out has a huge impact. Is there anything else that you'd share in terms of kind of like brilliant ways for looking after, or things that you kind of learned along the way. I mean, obviously food is a huge thing for you, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think a lot of what I've like discovered with food and implemented in my own life that's helped my physical body, but also it helps your mental body, is the
Mm.
power of eating fermented foods, probiotics. So probiotics are basically bacteria and fungi and other things that live in like certain foods.
Mm.
It can be extracted and used into supplements as well, but getting more fermented foods into your diet is basically supplying your body with more life. Like it
Wow, okay.
genuinely is, because these bacterias, they have their own life force. They have their own DNA. They are strains of like colonies of different like miniature microbes. We are not microbes because we're human, but we are made up of microbes,
Yeah.
and that bacteria lives throughout our body, but there's our gut bacteria affects our health, and it also affects the way hormones are delivered around our body, or hormone like sort of regulation in our body. So if you're eating foods are rich in bacteria, so that is probiotics, and then feeding those probiotics with prebiotics, so that's things like starchy vegetables or
Mhm, mhm.
pulses like lentils, chickpeas, like onions, garlic, they're all prebiotics. They're
Yeah,
feeding those bacteria. There's good bacteria. There are bad bacteria in our body, but sometimes it's needed there so our immune system knows what's a threat outside, so it can know to heal. But anyways, when we're eating all that stuff, it's not only working on our immune system, it's working on the hormone delivery and hormone regulation, sorry. So that then helps like
our
with
minds.
balancing out
Yeah,
things like cortisol, or balancing things like, that's going to cause us to feel certain ways. And that's what is going on in our mind. If we are having sort of like a challenge mentally, there's a hormone imbalance. That's a lot of what's happening there. So eating, yeah, definitely like loads of good fats. I like tell people eat coconut oil like it's your life
yeah,
depends on
okay.
it. Like,
Really?
coconut oil is so good for you. It's like so rich in
And
like
delicious.
saturated fats. Saturated fats are like, for years they were, the marketing and food industry tried to tell us they were bad for us and they cause high cholesterol. There's so many like nuances to some of the things that we get told
Yeah,
in the medical like science community that isn't really broken down for people. People need it in a like quick like bite. So
yeah,
cholesterol isn't a bad thing. There's different types of cholesterol. So a lot of what might cause high cholesterol is actually in a lot of starchy refined grains, but it was always put on like butters and fats. But you want to eat good saturated fats. Olive oil is a great one, extra virgin olive oil,
yeah.
in your nuts, in your seeds, all of these things like fats and
Amazing.
probiotics, prebiotics as well. It's a whole food diet. And I think people get worked up, especially like I think it's informative to know that what different minerals you're getting, what different vitamins you're getting, and nutrients you get from food. But I think sometimes people can be so focused on that,
Yeah,
and all you need to do is actually just go and diversify your diet and eat foods that look as close to how they came out of the ground.
yeah, get it. Get it.
Literally.
Oh, Cheryl, I've loved this. These tips are amazing. Can I just run through some that I think that really came out for me? You know, I love the fact that you so beautifully can talk about the link between our physical and mental health by sharing your story around obviously the challenges that you have with the illness that you live with day to
Mm,
day, right? And how, the the fact that our body is constantly sending us signals of how our mind is feeling,
mm,
like that is so fucking powerful, and we've just got to get so much better at listening to that, you know
mm,
and I see the work that you're doing, how it's bringing it all together. And I really loved as well, that whole point that you were saying about, I really understand that for you, you really tap into what you genuinely need in life, be that you really understand that creativity is at your core, through to understanding what it is that you need to eat, or actually the need for physical movement, for changing how you're feeling up there. You've
mm.
brought to life so beautifully the connection between kind of physical and mental for me. I love the other tips as well, either moving, or you talked about journaling quite a lot as well. And then finally, the brilliant part about literally what we consume is constantly having an effect on up here, and those, those brilliant examples there of either probiotics specifically, or, the good fats, or things that, just having a really diverse diet with stuff that's as whole as possible, and as similar to how it came out of the ground. Thank you. Like, this has been awesome. You've shared some incredible stuff for us today. Like, what a brilliant start to the day. Thank you so much.
It's such a lovely start. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I really I've enjoyed the series so far. So I look forward to listening to all the other interviews.
This is the kind of stuff, I hope that, as a takeout from this, for people to say, I get how physical and mental are totally aligned. They're not separate things.
No.
That's so important, and such an important way to ground and start our day for World Mental Health Day. So thank you so much.
Oh, yes, you're welcome.
Well, have a wicked day. Have a really good World Mental Health Day, and I will see you very soon. We can't wait to do more work with you.
Yeah, me too.
Have a lovely day, darling. See you soon.
You too,